From Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. This summary is brought to you by Hook My Book. Charles Darwin was one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. He is most famous for his theory of natural selection, which explains how species change and adapt over time. However, after publishing his theory, he hit a wall and stopped making new discoveries. His last years were filled with sadness because he was not able to continue his work the way he wanted. The author describes how he understands the striver's curse, a condition where people who achieve great things often become unhappy and feel like their success isn't sustainable. He goes on to say that there is a way out, and that it requires hard work, humility, and accepting change. Most high-skill professionals experience a decline in their performance sometime between their late 30s and early 50s. This decline is most pronounced for scientists, writers, and financial professionals. The peak age for many creative fields is in the mid-30s. After this, productivity tends to decline. Strive for success, but know that as you age, your achievements will become less frequent and easier to come by. Accept that you will have to work harder to maintain your success. Second curve. Bach's music was very popular in his time, but he experienced some declines in his career. For example, his music became outdated and people no longer wanted to listen to it. However, he stayed resilient and continued to teach and compose. J.S. Bach could easily have become embittered like Darwin, feeling left behind by the musical cognoscenti after a career at the forefront. Instead, he took pride in his son's originality and redesigned his own life, moving from musical innovator to master teacher. He spent the last 10 years of his life working on, among other projects, that greatness of Bach. Charles Darwin was a preternaturally gifted scientist who attained great fame in his early years for his innovations in biology. However, he hit a wall later in life and became despondent and depressed. Bach, on the other hand, saw his late-in-life success in music as a jumping-off point to further success as an instructor. He died beloved and fulfilled, respected even in his own time. This contrast between Darwin and Bach shows the importance of taking advantage of changing circumstances even when things go wrong. Kick of success. The author describes how people become addicted to success, and how it can be damaging. People become addicted to success because it gives them a sense of pleasure and approval, which is similar to other addictive substances. Workaholics crave success because it is a way to escape from their regular life. Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln were both famous for their success, and they both had to deal with the consequences of their addiction. Most successful people experience a short-lived high from their success, but eventually, they reach a point where they can't satisfy their addiction anymore. The successful person who is addicted to success will ultimately end up unhappy and dead. Objectification is the act of viewing someone or something as a mere object, without regard to the person or thing's intrinsic worth. The problem with self-objectification is that it can lead to pride, fear of failure, and a lack of satisfaction with one's accomplishments. It can also lead to social comparison, which can lead to a feeling of emptiness and depression. Success addicts often experience withdrawal, which can be an agonizing physical experience. Success addicts are people who are so focused on their careers that they neglect other areas of their lives. They may have trouble defining their self-worth in terms of other things, like their relationships or their hobbies. They may also be worried about their professional future and whether they will be remembered after they retire. Finally, they may find themselves dreaming about their career successes even when they are not enjoying them. If any of these sounds like you, it might be time to get help. If you want to be happy, you have to state your honest aspiration to be happy, to be willing to be a little less special in worldly terms, and thus stop objectifying yourself. You must state your desire to lighten your load with pride's opposing virtue, humility. As people grow older in the West, they generally think they should have a lot to show for their lives, a lot of trophies. According to more Eastern thinking, this is backward. As we age, we shouldn't accumulate more to represent ourselves but rather strip things away to find our true selves, and thus, to find our second curve. We chase our worldly attachments up our first success curve. We work ourselves to death to attain the elusive satisfaction. When the success curve starts to bend back down, the attachments give us tremendous suffering. These attachments must be chipped away to make it possible to jump onto the second curve. Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of living in the present moment, and that small, insignificant moments can be filled with happiness and satisfaction. The author explains that the conventional bucket list is a way to avoid focusing on the end of life, but that we should also be planning for the end and making sure that we use our time well. Ponder your death. People have a fear of death because it is a reminder of our mortality. Death is something that is inevitable, but it is also impossible to understand. This creates an unresolvable, unbearable cognitive dissonance in us. The fear of decline involves our fear of non-existence, and our fear of decline is often a result of our fear of death. For example, when Walt Disney became successful as an animator, he threw himself completely into his work to distract himself from his fear of death. On the Sunday afternoon before the first day of each month, contemplate these questions. If I had 1 year left in my career and my life, how would I structure this coming month? What would be on my to-do list? What would I choose not to worry about? I am willing to guess that, taking an extra work trip at the expense of seeing my spouse, and staying late to impress the boss, are not items that will be on your schedule. More likely, take a weekend away, and call my friend will show up instead. This discipline helps us work on mindfulness, living in the present as opposed to the past or future. Successful people are more likely to suffer when their skills start to decline than unsuccessful people. This is because the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Loneliness is also a special malady for people who have enjoyed a lot of worldly success. Celebrities like Anthony Bourdain and John Cacioppo are good examples of this. Loneliness is linked to burnout among leaders. Leaders are particularly prone to loneliness because true friendships at work are difficult or impossible with people under one's authority and supervision. Vanaprastha. The author advises moving on to a new stage of life, with new skills, to defeat the scourge of attachments. This can be difficult, but it's essential for true spiritual growth. The new stage is called Vanaprastha, and it comes around age 50. Many people in their 40s and 50s find that their interest in religion or spirituality suddenly increases. This is because as we get older, we start to see that life is not as tidy as we once thought it was and that there are many mysteries that religion can't explain. This is when people start to embrace faith and find happiness in it. If you are in a transitional state in your life and find your interest in the transcendental growing, even if you have marginalized this part of life in the past, you are right on schedule. Don't resist. The benefits of weakness. The author discusses the idea that vulnerability, or being open and honest, can be beneficial in several ways. For example, studies have shown that when nurses are vulnerable with patients, they are more absorbed in their work and patients become more courageous and engaged in their care, and thus have better outcomes. Furthermore, organizational leaders are happier, and perceived as more effective by their subordinates, when they are vulnerable and human. Conversely, people who are defensive or aloof reduce trust among those they lead, are unhappier and are less effective as a result. Finally, the author talks about how he changed his life after a plane ride where he overheard an elderly man talking about how he wishes he was dead because life has become a burden to him. The author then starts to do research into this and concludes that he, too, may face the same fate if he does not make changes. He decides to make major changes in his life and focuses on developing his crystallized intelligence, developing deep friendships and family relationships, and deepening his spiritual life. He pledges not to objectify himself and be defenseless about his weaknesses to learn and dedicate his life to helping others. He encourages the reader to remember the lesson that love is for people and not things, and to take this lesson to heart. End of the summary. Thanks for listening.